Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning in for Trading in Transparency. I'm here with Leo, the Sourcemap CEO and founder. This is part of our Good Impacts Ascent series, ethical webinars with ethical business leaders. Good Impacts provides a number of services, everything from project design and implementation, all the way through helping support systemic change within industries. For more information on that, please feel free to visit goodimpacts.com, and we'll talk about how we can help you on your ethical entrepreneurial journey. Couple of quick housekeeping notes. This is not your first time tuning in with us. These are pretty familiar, and I think they're pretty standard practice with most webinars at this point. Everybody's cameras are off and your mics are off. We'll leave them that way for the duration of our conversation. But please feel free to add any questions, comments, thoughts in either the Q&A function or the chat function down at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And this webinar is being recorded for future use. A couple of quick notes about me, and then we'll get into the much more interesting Leo. I started Good Impacts in 2018 as a vehicle to support ethical businesses as champions for change, specifically small and mid-sized businesses. Prior to that, I have a background in journalism and communications, as well as nonprofit fund development and leadership, and a little bit of supply chain work also, particularly in specialty coffee. But let's talk about Leo. Leo is a loud, proud supply chain transparency advocate. He's been listed as one of America's most promising social entrepreneurs. He's also cracked the 100 most influential people in business ethics. He's got his doctorate from MIT Labs and still teaches there. Leo, is that right?
Off and on.
Gotcha. And previously, he's also served as a professor at NYU and Columbia. So, pretty much an all-around slacker. So a little bit about Sourcemap. This excellent company is really providing the first visualizations developed specifically for supply chains. And their enterprise level software focuses on supply chain transparency. It's an MIT spinoff, so you can do the math on what that means. And the technology provides continuous assurance over social and environmental practices, something that's sorely needed. And right now, they're plugged into almost 500,000 farms and 40,000 registered factories. And they have worked with and are continuing to work with large and really exciting brands like Mars, Vans, North Face, etc. So that was pretty rapid fire, but I want to make sure we save time to chat, Leo. So, Sourcemap and the work that you do, it seems like your job largely centers around gallivanting from farm to farm, producer community to producer community all around the world when you're not speaking on stage. So what does a realistic work day or work year look like for you and your team?
I wish we could be gallivanting around, especially now. Sourcemap is first and foremost, we're a software company. So the impetus here was I always my activism always taught me that companies had these big bad supply chains and they were denying, or they had plausible ways of denying that they didn't know what was wrong until somebody found out about it in the press. And I decided to work on it by kind of outing them or putting a platform to publish supply chains online. And that's when we learned that companies actually just didn't know their supply chains at all. And we were showing this off at MIT, and the brands that came over said, well, you have a map of my supply chain. Can you show me how are we in a forest that's being deforested? Is the village in which we've built a school, actually having kids go to that school instead of working in the farms? And so I realized that maybe, I guess, in addition to calling out these issues and advocating, there was a big job actually providing the software for companies to be able to communicate with these tens or hundreds of thousands of first mile producers in their supply chains. And so we set about doing that. And that means we spend most of our time actually demoing software, talking to customers, figuring out their data, their needs, analyzing everything, and presenting it to their leadership in a way that gets them to actually invest in sustainability.
So in working with some of these large enterprise level clients, corporations that we all know and recognize, what are some of the takeaways that you've seen from working with these organizations?
Well, I guess the first, and then what continues to be really affirm the work we do is within the big companies that bring your clothing and your food and your footwear, your technology to market. There are lots of individuals who want to be doing the right thing with their supply chains, and so these are the people who reach out to us, and they've inherited a world and a supply chain that is really unchanged since the 70s and 80s, way before the internet, and they don't have the systems. You can see what your friends are having for lunch on Instagram, but there's absolutely no social network that's connecting a candy company with a cocoa farmer, or an apparel company with a leather tannery. And so they're coming to us and saying, look, we have this visibility in our private lives, we don't have it at work. How do we bridge those divides and install a real social network that allows us to work, as a company, to enforce the standards we care about, not just within our four walls, but also with our suppliers?
So access to better understanding about their supply chains and the lives contained within those, how have you seen that change the practices, either of individuals, within these organizations, or the organizations themselves?
Yeah, I mean, it's until we started mapping supply chains, the way you would try to improve conditions was really buying certified materials, maybe sending some auditors to go visit a few of your farms, maybe investing in some projects like, I don't know, building a school, building a water pump. And when we started collecting data, on a real-time basis from the whole supply chain, we realized those projects were almost always in the wrong village, or not really having the impact that farmers needed the most. And the shift has been for most of our customers towards getting more money into the hands of producers at the raw material, the first mile of the supply chain. So they've shifted the kinds of things they invest in. They still certify and they invest in certification, but now they've shifted a lot of their resources into how do we get farmers, people working in mines, people working in factories, how do we get those individuals more resources so that they can invest in their families and their communities themselves, because they're the best position to do that.
Kind of putting you on the spot here, but can you think of a specific company and producer community interaction that sort of embodies that approach?
Certainly, we do work with a number of cocoa traders, and so these are the companies that you wouldn't know as a consumer, but they get the cocoa from the ground, usually from West Africa, and then they bring it to the chocolate factory, which is usually in Europe or in North America. They've kind of had a virtuous circle. So they were generally always bidding the lowest price, frankly, the lowest quality, whatever the market would bear. And we went with them and we pitched together, look, what if you gave us a slightly higher price, slightly better quality, and a slightly bigger volume, if we could get you assurance that, the children are going to school, there's a working health clinic and a water pump nearby, there's a fair price being paid to the farmer. and that the cocoa is actually coming from the farms where you think it is. And they were able to go to market. They moved a few thousand tons the first year. They moved 10,000 the second year. They're moving about 40,000 tons a year now of this, traceable, transparent, sustainable cocoa. I can't name names, but all I can say is that if you know the price of cocoa, that's a significant boost.
Yeah, I'm looking at a few of the folks who are joining us today. They are definitely familiar with that supply chain. So let's say I'm a small or mid-sized business. I've got limited bandwidth, but I feel like I know and I like my vendors and I can trust my vendors. Why do I need to go past that? Why do I need to dig deeper into my supply chain?
I mean, it's really a matter of competing on the market, a crowded market, especially if your brand is a social one. It's a progressive one, and so you need to be able to go and say, look, these are the ways in which we're sustainable, and these are the ways in which we're holding ourselves accountable and measuring that our standards are also the standards of our suppliers. And it can be as simple as a code of conduct, except instead of just your suppliers, it has to also cascade down to their suppliers, or it can be as much as a vertically integrated supply chain where you've gone and you've selected your raw materials. Let's say you're working in food or flavors, and you've selected them on a set of standards, and you're holding yourself accountable. And it really just means that you can then tell your customers if you're a B2B company, or tell your consumers if you're a B2C, that your products are measurably better than your competitors in terms of social impact, and then they should be buying them if they want their dollars to count towards that impact.
And based on the work that you've done and you're continuing to do, are you seeing that the consumers will, in fact, pay more for products with a high degree of traceability and transparency? There's a litany of consumer survey data out there that says they will, but I know that doesn't always match the purchasing decisions, unfortunately.
No, I completely agree. I mean, the biggest driver to implementing traceability right now is a company inside the company, their own employees. They want to attract the best talent, and that talent wants to know that they're working for a company that does things right. And so that's where the actual impetus is. It's companies that want to spread their values from within. It is tough when you're competing with lots of other messaging to lead with a social impact message at the retail side of things. You might want to be messaging more on your product features or the lifestyle that it enables. And so they're competing for very little consumer attention. I think there's a well-defined niche of consumers that will prefer a transparent product. The problem is they don't have time to verify that transparency. So I still think the drive for supply chain transparency is going to come from inside the company. It's going to come from people who have a lot more time to compare different vendors. And they might spend a whole year focusing on which coffee vendors are we going to use, and then they have the real leverage and the information to drive change.
So one of the things we were talking about before the webinar started is the current COVID crisis and supply chain and market disruptions. How are you seeing supply chains with a higher degree of transparency holding up versus more traditional supply chains when in a situation like right now when there's massive disruption?
It's always a terrible time to say I told you so. The problem is our customers, they've gone to these lengths to map their supply chain, so they know they're tier one, they're direct suppliers, they're tier twos, they're tier threes, and sometimes they've gone and mapped thousands and tens of thousands of farmers as well. So when the crisis happened, it was a matter of hours before they could send emails to everybody, say, "Are you okay? What do you need? If anything is wrong, what can we do to help you stay in business?" Because companies need their suppliers to be able to supply them. The problem is, of course, in a crisis, is not a good time to start figuring out what your supply chain looks like. So we've had a lot of we've started to help a lot of companies that didn't do that homework ahead of time, so that if there's God forbid, a second wave, they're going to have a better map in place and be in contact with their suppliers.
So are you now, after we've seen the impacts of a lot of disruptions, are you seeing more companies rushing to better understand their supply chains?
No, there's no question. I mean, we're growing. We're seeing a shift from, proxy approaches, which was, I'm going to hire a consultant to set up my supply chain, but then I'm never going to revisit it, or I'm going to pay a certification company to make sure to certify my supply chain, but I'm never going to talk to them again, to saying, okay, no, we need to be connected all the time with our suppliers, for good, for better and worse, right? If we find out that they're doing great, we can grab more supply of higher quality raw materials. And if we find out they're doing bad, we can immediately step in to help and make sure they're not going and getting disrupted for any significant amount of time.
So if I'm a smaller mid-sized business that has experienced disruptions, or is just listening to consumer signals and wants to start to better understand my supply chain, but have never taken any steps before, what are some good first steps that an SMB could take?
Yeah, so from the point of view of where we stand, I think every company should register for this free website we have called Open Sourcemap, and start mapping your supply chain. And that'll just tell you intuitively, where the gaps are, where you might be going too far or too close to buy things. And it'll also give you a very easy plug and play tool to market your sourcing decisions. And then we see a lot of companies that are growing through capital, and they're going to venture debt institutions to get money to double, triple, quadruple in size in the next year. And so for them, we're saying, well, come visit us, but go to your investors with a pitch for how your social enterprise, how your enterprise's supply chain is gonna be best in class in terms of social environmental impact. And that often means to them, it sends a signal that you're ready to build the infrastructure, the technology to trace your product and to have a differentiated raw material, so higher quality, more reliable delivery, better storytelling. And so you might not be able to put full transparency and traceability in place if you're two people in a garage, but if you're going to that growth step, get to know us, get to know what your options are in terms of mapping and traceability, and then take that to your investors, because it's definitely a shortcut to getting to a digital professional supply chain.
Is that an argument that's particularly compelling only for impact investing at this point, or are more traditional capital sources also receptive to that information?
Look, it's a de-risking approach broadly. So if you're selling jewelry, if you're selling clothing, if you're selling food, if you're even moving electronics, the fact that you've mapped your supply chain to the subcomponent or to the raw material just means you know your stuff. And there's not going to be anybody losing sleep when something, bad weather, natural disaster, a pandemic, or some kind of reputational risk comes up, because you'll have done your due diligence ahead of time. So it's increasingly a best practice, and it's becoming a license to do business. And if you want to sell some materials that could have conflict in them, child labor, forced labor, anything like that, you're not going to be able to get in front of a big retailer or a big brand very shortly, unless you can show the chain of custody that you've taken the steps to map it and monitor it. So I would just say it may be only about 6 months to 18 months from now that becomes the case, but better get your ducks in a row.
So Leo, I feel compelled to ask the obvious question. The way you've laid it out makes so much sense. Why hasn't every business, big or small, done this due diligence? They've certainly done it in other areas.
They have. It's an industry transformation. I mean, it's nothing less than an industry transformation. So it involves, for some companies, it was a no-brainer. They already had a very sophisticated integrated supplier program, and they were constantly working with their suppliers to improve their practices. So this was just one more tool to add to their toolbox. For other companies, they're very lean, maybe they've been buying through agents. Maybe they've never really had control over the raw materials that go into their supply chain. And so for them, it's a transformation that involves leadership as well. And it basically means, instead of a company that just plays this very narrow role of transforming something from this state to that state, we're going to be a company that is a supply chain company. If you look at what it did for Apple when they started controlling, the whole microchip, you look at what it does for a coffee company like a Starbucks that has standards all the way to the farm. It's transformative, but it takes investment in innovation. It takes investment in new young talent, and it takes investment in technology. So I think it's about to happen, but it happens in different industries at different speeds. With a lot of commodity food ingredients, it's already the norm or the majority. With apparel, it's starting to get there. With cosmetics, electronics, automotive, it's just the beginning of their trajectory.
What sector do you think is going to step up next? It sounds like many of them are getting on board, but who's going to become the emerging leader if you had to prognosticate?
We're bullish on beauty, personal care. People have always had an extra degree of concern for what they eat, where it comes from, and then clothing, what they wear on their bodies. And I think this is the perfect category that's kind of in between. You're putting it on your skin, you're breathing it in. It's really part of your environment. And so whether that means focus on clean ingredients that are non-toxic or healthier, focus on clean sourcing, paying a premium for makeup that is made without any mica, that was made with child labor, so things like that. So I think it's going to become a differentiator because people are willing to pay a premium for a higher quality personal care product. And so I think that's going to be the next sector to see a lot of growth in traceability.
Excellent. Well, hopefully that is the case. In the spirit of opening things up, definitely like to hear if there are any questions from our attendees. Like I mentioned up at the top, feel free to throw those in the chat function down at the bottom of your Zoom screen or over in the Q&A. Or if you're particularly Zoom savvy, just raise a hand and I'll give you a call. So while we wait for some of those to come in, Leo, what's next for Sourcemap specifically?
This is a pretty exciting time. So the focus for the last 10 years has been tracing product from all the way where it starts to consumer and providing that accountability that brands want into their supply chain. And now the focus is going the other way. Basically, the money. Is the money making it into the hands of the people, the communities that need it the most? And if not, why not? And how do we bypass those systems and get those producers paid directly? So it's a bit the idea of a fair trade or a premium distribution from the coffee or the cocoa sector, but it's really putting in place those mechanisms where there's no fraud, there's no leakage, there's no middlemen taking an undue share, because we're seeing a lot of people that are not making enough money and providing those critical raw materials, and we want to cut out any opacity in terms of getting them their due share.
And you mentioned seeing major brands starting to not put all their eggs in the certification basket. And a couple of the questions I'm seeing have a similar theme of, we're already purchasing and paying for fair trade. Is that not good enough?
Look, I mean, the certifiers have set the standards that we all consider to be, best in class for environmental and for social impact, and they are the reason that Sourcemap exists, in the sense that they, before social networks, they were the only way that you could make sure that there was standards being implemented. Now that we have this big data that we can be in contact constantly with everybody in the supply chain, we still use the certification approach, their standards, their audits as a foundational piece of the pie, but we are also constantly monitoring every transaction, every household, whatever data we can get, satellite imagery, to make sure that it's not just those places that we can afford to visit in person that are living up to those standards. It's the whole supply chain living up to it all the time.
Excellent. So you'll get a kick out of this, Leo, because we were talking about this right before we started the webinar. But yeah, somebody's wondering, is Sourcemap integrating blockchain into this overall process?
Look, blockchain has applications that are being tested as we speak, and they're really for the more sophisticated ends of the supply chain. So there's Walmart is a big proponent. IBM is the biggest proponent of blockchain. It is a technology that uses a lot of servers, a lot of very expensive databases, and has a very high sign-up cost. We're more focused on the other side of the supply chain, where paper bookkeeping might still be the norm, where there might not be mobile internet, where there's not mobile banking. And that's probably about 500 million to 1 billion people. And on that end of the chain, blockchain is going to take a very long time to get there. What we need to do is just leapfrog all the traditional approaches, certainly the paper, and go straight to a very cheap mobile phone that can receive signal every now and then and keep people informed in both directions. And so we're more concerned with patching up the base of the supply chain, that billion people that doesn't have access to very expensive technology. At the end of the day, though, we'll put that data into a blockchain if Walmart asks for it.
Excellent. Well, there are a number of other questions, but I think for the sake of time, we're going to leave it here. I'm going to throw, Leo, your contact information up on the screen here. Just make sure I'm still sharing. I am still sharing. Perfect. Yeah, so best ways to stay connected with you, Leo, obviously visiting the website, reaching out via email, signing up for the newsletter. Anything else that I haven't included here?
By all means, just get in touch, and big or small, we're very interested to learn from you and support companies in any industry that are making their supply chains more transparent.
Excellent. And then a couple of quick good ways to stay connected with us at Good Impacts. This conversation will be up on our YouTube channel later today, and we've got a number of other conversations with ethical business leaders available there. Please feel free to send us thoughts and feedback on this webinar. We always love hearing them. And you can always drop me a line at nick@goodimpacts.com. Leo, any parting thoughts for the fine folks before we call it a day?
Keep fighting that good fight.
I don't think it gets any better than that. All right. Thanks, Leo. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.
Thank you.